It was the summer of 2017, the kind of summer that clings to your skin like syrup. I was broke, saving for my last year of college, and figured a yard sale might help. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I dragged all our junk old textbooks, lamps, and cheap furniture onto the lawn. We lived on one of those quiet streets where the loudest noise was someone mowing their lawn too early on a Sunday. My best friend Mark promised to stop by later, mostly to mock my attempts at adulting. By mid-morning, the yard sale was dull but peaceful. Then he showed up. He didn't park anywhere nearby. He just appeared walking up the sidewalk, silent and deliberate. He looked ordinary at first, mid-40s, faded navy work shirt, dark jeans. But his face, it made the summer air turn cold. It wasn't a mask. The makeup was subtle, cheap, and horribly wrong. His skin was pale, powdered to kill any trace of warmth. His mouth was smeared with a wide, crimson slash that stretched just a bit too far, like a smile drawn by someone who'd never seen one. No red nose, no wig, no clown suit. Just a regular man with a face that screamed dead mime. He stopped near a kiddie pool full of old board games and stared straight at me. Didn't move, didn't blink. I forced a smile. "Anything catch your eye, sir?" Nothing. He just stood there, the shadow of his baseball cap hiding his eyes, that red grin fixed on me like a wound. After a full minute, he reached into his pocket and laid a crisp $10 bill on a stack of old magazines. He didn't take anything. He turned and walked away, without a word. I waited until he disappeared around the corner before checking the money. Under it was a small white business card. On the back, written in thick red marker, were 3 words. "I saw you. M?" Sarah tried to stay calm. "Maybe it's a prank," she said. "Performance art or something." She tossed the card in the trash. "We kept the $10. We needed it." Mark laughed when I told him. "Bro, you got $10 for free. That's not creepy. That's capitalism." But that night, I found a red balloon tied to the spokes of my bike on the porch, deflated, faded, tied in a perfect bow. It hadn't been there before. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Every creak made me look outside, expecting that pale face. Sarah thought I was overreacting, and maybe I was, until I saw him again. I was at the hardware store, halfway down the lighting aisle, when I felt it, that crawling pressure between my shoulder blades. I looked up, and there he was at the other end. Same man, same work shirt, same grin. He was holding a small box of nails, pretending to shop, but his eyes were locked on me. The grin looked stretched even wider now, like it was alive. I couldn't move. My stomach dropped, and my hands went cold. This wasn't coincidence. I bolted down another aisle, out the emergency door, and straight to my car. When I told Sarah, she sighed. "Alex, you saw someone who looks like him. You're letting this get to you." But I knew it was him. The grin doesn't lie. That night, something changed. I was in the shower when I heard a soft thud in the living room. I froze, turned off the water, listened. Nothing. The front door was chained. Windows locked. Sarah asleep. I told myself it was nothing until I looked at the bathroom mirror. Through the fogged glass, a shape had been drawn. A face. His face. The faint outline of hollow eyes and that long, curved smile, traced perfectly into the condensation. Someone had been in the bathroom while I was in the shower. My legs nearly gave out. The air felt thick and cold, like the house itself was breathing. I wiped it away, but the faint chill of the glass where the grin had been seemed to stay under my skin. I didn't tell Sarah that night. I couldn't. But fear doesn't stay buried for long. By morning, I broke down and told her everything. The note, the balloon, the hardware store, the mirror. This time, she didn't rationalize it away. She looked terrified. "We're calling the cops." 2 officers came by that night, one young and bored, the other old and tired. They listened, took notes, and told me the same thing every horror victim hears before the second act. No break-in, no assault, no property damage. Might be harassment, but without evidence, there's nothing we can do. They left me with a pamphlet about home security and a suggestion to get some rest. That afternoon, I bought a motion sensor camera and set it up by the back door. Mark came over to help, still smirking. "Man, you're officially paranoid," he said. "You're gonna catch a raccoon, not a clown." "Then I'll sleep better," I muttered. That night, I sat glued to my laptop, watching the black and white live feed. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of night. Around 2:15 a.m., the motion alert went off. I clicked play. The porch was still. Then, from the darkness, he appeared. Just appeared, like he stepped out of the night itself, standing perfectly centered in frame. Same clothes, same smile, eyes aimed directly at the camera at me. He didn't move for 30 seconds, just stared, letting the silence crush me. Then, slowly, he raised his right hand. In it was a silver picture frame, the one from Sarah's nightstand, the photo of us smiling at a fair. My blood turned to ice. He held the frame over his face, pressing the glass against his mouth, and wiped. The red paint smeared across the photo, staining it. When he lowered it, his real face was visible for the first time. Ordinary, tired, human, just a man. Then he dropped the frame, the glass shattered on the porch, and he walked backward, into the dark, never breaking eye contact with the lens. The motion sensor went silent. When morning came, the house felt wrong. It wasn't just fear, it was presence, like the walls themselves remembered him. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, clutching the empty space where the photo frame used to be. Mark was pale, speechless. He had seen the footage, and whatever smug skepticism he had left was gone. "We can't stay here," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "He's not stopping." I agreed. We packed immediately, every movement rushed and frantic. It didn't feel like leaving home, it felt like escaping something alive. Every time I stepped outside with a box, I expected him to be there, watching. In 15 minutes, the car was packed. I slammed the trunk shut, trying to calm the tremor in my hands. The neighborhood was still, too still. Then I saw it. On the upstairs window, our bedroom window, 3 objects were neatly pressed against the glass, perfectly aligned in the morning light. On the left, the crisp $10 bill. In the center, the white business card with "I saw you" written in red. On the right, the silver picture frame, shattered, the photo of Sarah and me still inside, the glass smeared with streaks of dried crimson. It was a display, a final message. The payment, the warning, and the cost. He'd been inside again. While we packed, while we panicked, he'd been right above us, silently arranging his little exhibition. I grabbed Sarah's hand. "Don't look back," I said, starting the car. We drove away, tires screeching, hearts pounding. I didn't stop until the town was a memory behind us. We crashed at Mark's uncle's cabin, 6 hours north, surrounded by trees and silence. It should have felt safe, but isolation has a way of magnifying fear. Every night, I imagine motion sensors going off, cameras flickering on, that same figure standing in the grainy black and white feed. Sarah barely spoke. Mark tried to be helpful, setting up makeshift locks, but it didn't matter. We weren't running from a place, we were running from a presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need walls or doors to follow you. The first night, nothing happened. The second, I woke up to a faint noise wood creaking outside. Mark grabbed a flashlight, but there was nothing there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness outside was aware of us. On the third night, I heard something different. Not a noise, a rhythm. 3 slow, deliberate taps against the window. I froze. Sarah stirred beside me. "What was that?" Mark came in from the next room, whispering, "You heard it too." We crept toward the window, flashlights trembling. The tapping stopped. For a second, there was only silence and our breathing. Then, something brushed against the glass. A shape, brief and colorless, like a hand withdrawing. I yanked the curtain open. Nothing, just the reflection of our terrified faces. Mark tried to play it off, saying it was probably an animal. But animals don't knock, and they don't leave reminders. When we stepped outside in the morning, we found it. Right under the window, nestled in the snow, like a forgotten toy, a single red balloon. Deflated, its string tied in that same perfect bow. We called the police again, this time from the small town nearby. They sent an officer, a kind-faced woman who tried to sound reassuring, though her eyes betrayed disbelief. She took down our statement, looked around, and sighed. "No footprints, no tire tracks. You're safe out here. Whoever that was, he's not following you." But as she spoke, her radio crackled. Static. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels like someone's listening. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring out at the endless dark. Somewhere between exhaustion and fear, I realized something. The man wasn't trying to hurt me. Not yet. He was performing. Every act, the note, the balloon, the mirror, the camera, was part of some twisted art piece where my fear was the applause. And maybe that's what scared me the most. He didn't want to kill me. He wanted to own the story. A week passed without incident. Sarah started to believe we'd escaped. She smiled again, sometimes. I almost let myself believe it too, until the morning I checked my phone. There was a new email in my inbox. No sender name, no subject, just an attachment, a single image file. I opened it. It was a still frame from my security camera, the one from the old house. But this image was new. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago. He was standing outside the cabin. Same work shirt, same grin, same stillness. Except this time, his hand wasn't empty. He was holding something, a small photo. When I zoomed in, my stomach turned. It was the picture of Sarah and me from the cabin kitchen table. He'd already been inside. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. The email vanished on its own, seconds later, like it had been pulled back. That was the moment I understood the truth. We weren't just being watched. We were being collected. Our fear, our images, our reactions, they were his trophies. We left the cabin that afternoon, driving until dawn. No destination, no plan, just distance. But distance doesn't help when the horror lives in the reflection. It's been years since that summer. I've moved 6 times, changed my number twice. Sarah and I don't talk anymore. Mark stopped answering calls. After one night, he said he saw a man standing outside his apartment building, motionless under a streetlight, smiling. The police never caught anyone. The footage, the balloon, the card they called it, elaborate coincidence. But sometimes, late at night, when I walk past a dark window, I see something faint, 2 eyes, a pale face, a red curve where a mouth should be. Maybe it's my imagination, maybe it's him. I keep the broken picture frame on my desk as a reminder. The glass still bears a faint red smear where his smile once was. I don't clean it off. Because the truth is, I've learned to live with the idea that he's still out there. Maybe he's found someone new. Maybe he's standing outside another house, holding another picture, drawing another grin in condensation. Or maybe, one night soon, I'll wake up and see a red balloon tied to my doorknob, the string knotted neatly into a perfect, small bow. And I'll know the performance has started again. This happened the summer I turned 21. I was working a dead-end job at Riverfront Amusements, a small, independently owned theme park in the sweltering heat of coastal South Carolina. It was one of those places that smelled perpetually of fryer grease, stagnant river water, and cheap cotton candy. My job was miserable. I was a security guard. My friend Daniel worked with me. He was the overreactor, a guy who saw a shadowy shape and immediately assumed a spectral killer was present. My manager, a man named Gary, was the skeptic, a hardened ex-cop who believed the only crime that mattered was an employee stealing a soda. The park had a cast of performers, mostly teenagers in low-quality foam mascot costumes, but it also had a designated clown alley. This was a small, grimy cinder block building behind the Tilt-A-Whirl where the 5 resident clowns, the park's main entertainers, got ready. They were usually harmless, loud, and constantly complaining about the heat and their blistered feet. The unsettling period began in late July, when we were short-staffed and Gary hired a new clown for the park's low-budget, nighttime haunted hayride. The new hire was a fill-in named Zippy. Zippy wasn't like the others. The park clowns were bright, primary-colored, and friendly. Zippy was a tramp clown, more muted colors, ragged clothes, and a face of profound, artificial sadness. His makeup was intricate, all shadows and downturned crimson, designed to look tragic and old. But the terrifying part wasn't the costume, it was the silence. The other clowns were constantly chattering, complaining, and joking. Zippy never spoke. Not to the guests, not to us, not even to the other clowns. He would arrive exactly 15 minutes before his shift, go into Clown Alley, transform, and then wander the park until his first hayride shift, doing nothing but performing slow, exaggerated pantomimes. He only had one. the slow, pained mime of a man pulling an invisible, impossibly heavy rope. He would do this for hours, standing in the middle of a pedestrian thoroughfare, drawing no crowd, and completely ignoring anyone who spoke to him. I went over to Clown Alley a couple of times on my rounds to see if he needed anything, or just to get him to acknowledge me. The other clowns had tried too. "He's giving us the creeps," one of the regulars, a girl named Carly, told me one night. He just sits there, completely silent, staring at the walls. He never changes his expression. We've asked him his real name. He just shakes his head. One evening, I found him alone in the alley. He was sitting on a metal folding chair, staring at the concrete wall. I cleared my throat and asked, "Hey, Zippy, everything okay? Need anything from the break room?" He slowly turned his head. The painted sad face looked directly at me. It was so still, it looked like polished porcelain. His actual eyes were completely neutral, devoid of any visible emotion, just looking through the heavy black paint of his brows. Then, he reached into the pocket of his tattered trousers. He slowly pulled out a small, white, palm-sized chalkboard and a piece of chalk. Without breaking eye contact, he wrote on the board, holding it up so I could read the single word: audition. He didn't elaborate. He didn't nod or point. He just set the board back in his lap, resuming his motionless stare at the wall. I walked away profoundly unsettled. What kind of audition was he talking about? He was already hired. Was it a joke? A bizarre method acting choice? I mentioned it to Daniel, who immediately jumped to conspiracy theories. "He's scoping the place out, Jake. He's auditioning to see if he can get away with something. He's going to rob the place, or worse," Daniel whispered frantically. Gary, the skeptic, overheard us. "It's a clown, Daniel. They're weird. It's called performance art, probably. The only thing he's stealing is oxygen." Ugh. But then the silence of Zippy's audition began to stretch into the other parts of the park. We started finding things in places they shouldn't be. Simple objects that had been moved, carefully placed, or sometimes gently damaged. It was the lack of force that made it disturbing. A small stuffed prize from the ring toss, a bright yellow duck, was found sitting on the highest point of the rusty, silent Ferris wheel, a feat that would require a key, an hour, and a safety harness, all done unnoticed. The next day, every single mirror in the employee bathroom was wiped clean, except for a single, small, perfectly drawn black tear, drawn in grease paint, in the bottom right corner of each one. Zippy's audition wasn't about the park, it was about us. He was measuring the boundaries of our security, our attention, and our sanity. He was checking to see what he could get away with before someone finally stopped looking the other way. The most unsettling incident happened 3 days after the mirror discovery, and it focused entirely on Daniel. Daniel, the overrector, was already nervous. He had taken to driving around the park perimeter at night, constantly looking into the dark woods that bordered the property. He was convinced Zippy was living in the woods, or maybe a derelict maintenance shed. On the third night of his self-imposed stakeout, he found a piece of evidence that broke him. Around 3 a.m., he called me, his voice a panicked, high-pitched mess. "Jake, I found it. I found his base. Get out here now." I met him by the back fence, where a small, overgrown creek marked the park's boundary. Daniel had his flashlight fixed on an old, disused drainage pipe that ran under the fence and into the woods. Tucked just inside the pipe's entrance, clearly visible, were 2 items. The first was a cheap, plastic-encased clock. It was one of the game prizes from the shooting gallery, depicting a cartoon pirate. The clock's minute hand had been carefully removed, and the remaining hour hand was fixed permanently on the 3, the time Daniel always started his solo perimeter patrol. The second item was a single, heavy, white boot, one of Zippy's oversized clown shoes. It was sitting upright, perfectly positioned, as if someone had simply stepped out of it and left it there. "He was watching me, Jake," Daniel stammered, his flashlight shaking. "He knew I would be here at 3. This is his final test." The message was clear. "I see your routine. I know when you're alone. The game is about to start." I drove Daniel home, convinced he needed a few days off. When I came back the next day, I found Gary, the skeptic, standing by the entrance to Clown Alley. He looked unusually grim. "Jake, come here," he said, nodding toward the back of the small building. On the cinder block wall, right where Zippy had been staring the night before, a large, intricate sketch had been drawn in black grease paint. It was a life-sized, detailed drawing of a smiling face. Not Zippy's sad face, but a wide, menacing, perfect smile. It was the face of a man caught in an impossible, frozen moment of pure, malicious glee. Below the face, written in the same thick black paint, was a single, cryptic question. Am I ready? We looked through the other clown's lockers. Zippy's was completely empty. He hadn't returned after Daniel found the shoe. He had simply disappeared, leaving a final, terrifying audition piece for his unwitting audience. Gary, seeing the drawing and realizing Daniel's disappearance was likely connected to the clown, finally snapped out of his skepticism. He called the police, but again, the lack of a body, a witness, or even clear evidence of a crime beyond some creepy vandalism made the entire investigation a footnote. They took a few photos of the drawing, dusted the empty locker, and left a note for Daniel's parents. I spent the next 2 days in a state of hypervigilance, completely certain that my life at the park was simply the intermission before Zippy's grand finale. Every distant siren, every flash of light, every sudden silence felt like the beginning of the end. On the third night, I was sitting alone in the security office, watching the static-filled monitors. It was 1 a.m., and the park had been closed for 3 hours. The silence was absolute. I was staring at the feed from the Ferris wheel camera, watching the empty seats sway slightly in the sea breeze, when the light on the control panel for the park's public address system flickered. Someone was using the microphone. I grabbed the handset to the main desk line, ready to call 911. A single, clear, unnervingly calm voice filled the small office. It wasn't a clown voice, not loud or silly. It was a normal male voice, speaking slowly and deliberately, amplified to fill the entire deserted park. "Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages," the voice began, a flat, almost mechanical tone overriding the speaker's slight South Carolina accent. "The Riverfront Amusements grand finale is about to commence." My blood turned to ice. It was Zippy. I knew it. The voice was ordinary, but the context was pure, terrifying spectacle. "Tonight's feature presentation," the voice continued, echoing eerily off the silent rides and empty pavement, "is an audition of survival." I fumbled with the desk phone, trying to dial the police, but my hands were slick with sweat. "Our main performer, the security officer, will be making his way from the main office," Zippy's voice announced to the empty park. His role, the escape artist. I was locked in. He knew exactly where I was, and he was using the park's infrastructure against me, turning the entire place into a maze designed for my panic. I was no longer the security guard. I was the prey. I dropped the phone and bolted out of the office, heading through the main gate. I had to get to my car, which was parked near the employee lot on the north side. I ran past the arcade, the cheap prizes glowing faintly in the moonlight, and sprinted down the main promenade. The air was heavy, and the adrenaline was burning in my lungs. I was halfway to the exit when I heard a new, terrifying sound. The tilt-a-whirl, completely unattended, had roared to life. The motor was screaming, and the cages were spinning wildly, the empty seats whipping around in the darkness. It wasn't just on, it was running at top, unsafe speed. He hadn't just used the PA, he had breached the control panels. I could hear the motor winding up, and I saw the massive shadow of the spinning ride cast against the funhouse. I ran faster, cutting through the food stands. "The escape artist is making excellent time," Zippy's voice crackled from the nearby speaker above the hot dog stand, sounding closer now, but the audience is getting impatient. Then, the second ride started up, the Ferris wheel. The giant wheel began its slow, inevitable ascent, its gears grinding, its empty cages swaying. And on the highest seat, silhouetted against the dark sky, I saw him. It was Zippy. He was sitting perfectly still, looking down at the park, at me. Even from that distance, I could see the painted white pallor and the exaggerated black brows. He was performing his silent mime of pulling an impossibly heavy rope, only this time, the rope was the park itself. The voice from the speaker was coming from him, broadcast from a mic he had somehow wired into the speaker on the Ferris wheel cage. He wasn't even speaking, just moving his lips in the exaggerated pantomime of speech. I was trapped between the screaming tilt-a-whirl and the towering, silent clown on the Ferris wheel. I made a dash for the closest cover, the clown alley building. I knew the alley was small, dark, and had a single, rickety back door. If I could get inside, lock the door, and call the police from there, I might have a chance to breathe. I slammed the front door of Clown Alley shut, throwing the bolt home. The air inside was stifling, thick with the smell of old grease paint and mildew. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking too violently to dial. The sound came from the ceiling, a single, powerful work light, the kind used for late-night maintenance, suddenly snapped on in the middle of the room. It was blinding, casting stark, theatrical shadows everywhere. I looked up. The light was brand new, and someone had installed it perfectly, aiming it right at the center of the room. And then I saw the rest of the installation. The back wall of the room, the wall that had held the grease paint drawing of the terrifying smile, was now completely covered. Daniel was there. He wasn't dead. He was pinned to the wall with rope, his arms and legs spread wide in a sickening inverted T. He was gagged with a bright yellow duck, the same stuffed prize from the ring toss. His face was pure terror, his eyes wide and vacant. But the most gut-wrenching detail was his face. It had been carefully, perfectly made up. He was wearing Zippy's mask, the tragic, downturned crimson grin, and the heavy, black tear streaking from his eye. The silent, sad mask. Suddenly, a voice that wasn't Zippy's, a voice right behind me, broke the stillness. "He's ready for his close-up," the voice whispered. I spun around. Standing in the doorway of the small maintenance closet I had thought was empty was Gary, the park manager, the skeptic. He wasn't wearing a clown costume. He was wearing a slightly too big, faded work shirt and a simple baseball cap. He was just an average, tired man. But on his face, drawn in fresh, clumsy red, was the wide, rigid, unforgettable grin from the yard sale card. He held a small, antique camera, a heavy, professional-grade thing, not a phone. Daniel failed his audition. "Too noisy," Gary said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. He took a single, loud-click photograph of Daniel on the wall. "But you, Jake, you got the pacing right. Pure panic. Good focus." Zippy wasn't a separate person. Zippy was the performance. It was a role that Gary, the bored, jaded ex-cop, took on to add excitement to his life. He was auditioning for a life beyond the mundane, and he was using the park staff as his victims. He wasn't an escape artist. He was a terrorist. I didn't think. I acted. I lunged at the manager, hitting him low and hard. The camera flew out of his hand and smashed against the concrete. The two of us tumbled backward into the corner. He was stronger than I expected, but I was powered by pure, desperate survival adrenaline. The fight was clumsy, a flurry of desperate punches and kicks. I managed to kick him back, slamming his head against the metal frame of an old steamer trunk. He slumped, dazed. I didn't wait. I scrambled back toward the front door, ripping the bolt open, and sprinted out into the night. I ran, hearing the tilt-a-whirl still screaming behind me, the Ferris wheel still grinding above. I didn't stop until I burst through the main gates and flagged down the first car I saw on the highway. Gary was arrested an hour later. They found him in Clown Alley, dazed, but trying to untie Daniel, who was in shock. Gary was charged with assault, false imprisonment, and a dozen other counts of vandalism and harassment. The investigation was national news for a week. The theme park manager, a frustrated, ordinary man who terrorized his staff as a performance artist. Daniel eventually recovered, but he never spoke about the incident. I quit the job, of course, but the haunting part is the silence. I now know two people who have been terrorized by a clown, and in both cases, the clown was not a supernatural entity. He was a frustrated, ordinary man who sought a thrill by forcing others to be the audience in his own terrifying, silent theater. I remember the camera smashing, and the thought that one day, another ordinary man, far away, might pick up the pieces of that twisted art and ask the same silent question, "Am I ready?" This story happened years later. My name is Marcus, and I am the calm thinker, a personality forced upon me by trauma. I had learned to channel my anxiety into obsessive planning and security. I lived in a quiet, upscale suburb in Oregon with my wife, Julia. I had a good job, a sturdy house, and a life I had meticulously built to be uneventful. Julia was my skeptic, a kind and sensible woman who insisted my past was just bad luck and that our life was perfectly normal. The catalyst for this new wave of fear wasn't a clown, but a simple, mundane piece of community infrastructure, the Neighborhood Watch program. It was late November, The Pacific Northwest rain was a constant drumming soundtrack to our lives. After a minor rash of car break-ins, the local neighborhood watch decided to step up patrols. The leader was a man named Mr. Peterson, a retired engineer, organized, meticulous, and slightly overzealous. The watch was simple: patrol the block in a shared vehicle, report anything suspicious, and log your hours. I volunteered because it fit my need for control. My first patrol shift was a week after I signed up. My partner was a man named Owen, a mid-20s, twitchy overreactor who seemed to believe every shadow was an impending threat. The routine was tedious. Slow laps, shining a weak flashlight into the dark hedges. About an hour into our shift, we were driving past the park at the end of the street, a small, dark triangle of old growth and playground equipment, when Owen suddenly gasped. "Stop the car! Stop! Right there!" he hissed. I hit the brakes. Owen pointed a trembling finger toward the park entrance. "The sign," he whispered. The park sign, a simple wooden plaque on a post, had been vandalized. Not with spray paint or graffiti, but with a series of tiny, perfectly cut, half-inch wide adhesive circles, the kind you use for color-coding files. They had been placed in a pattern on the sign, forming two large, round, white eyes. Beneath the eyes, a line of thin red electrical tape had been stretched into a simple, wide, half-moon smile. It was rudimentary, childlike, and yet absolutely chilling. "It's a clown face, a stick-on clown face," Owen stammered, his eyes darting into the dark trees. I got out of the car, my heart beginning its familiar, cold acceleration. This was too specific, too familiar. The modus operandi was the same: small, silent, non-violent acts of psychological intrusion. I pulled the red tape off the sign. It left a faint, sticky residue. Beneath it, I found a small, meticulously printed business card, the size of a postage stamp. It was a mock-up of the Neighborhood Watch logo. On the back, written in perfect, tiny block letters, was a single, disturbing modification to the group's mission statement. "We are watching you, and you are watching us." I didn't tell Owen about the card. I just put it in my pocket, feeling the familiar dread solidify in my gut. I told him it was just a prank, and we spent the rest of the night checking the dark houses. My internal calm, a forced, desperate veneer. When I got home, Julia was asleep. I went into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror, pulling out the tiny card. "We are watching you." The plural pronoun was what chilled me the most. It implied a conspiracy, a network of silent watchers who had managed to infect the one place I thought was safe, the mechanism of security itself. The clown wasn't just a threat, it was now a colleague. The next night, I felt compelled to take a second patrol shift, this time alone. I needed to see if the activity was escalating. I picked up the logbook from Mr. Peterson's house. It was a standard composition notebook, detailing the date, hours, and notes of each patrol. I flipped through it, not looking for my name, but for anomalies. I found one on the day before I started. Date: Novedest 15. Time: 12 a.m., 2 a.m. Patrol Group: P. Peterson, M. Marcus, unattended. Notes: quiet night. Observed unusual activity near the Green's house. A figure was seen standing in their hedge line for approximately 15 minutes. Figure was not moving. Seemed to be staring at the house. Unable to identify. Will follow up. The chilling part was the log entry itself. Monsieur Marcus, unattended. My name was listed, but I hadn't started until the 16th. And the figure staring at the house, not moving. It was the same chilling, silent surveillance from the yard sale clown. I took a picture of the page with my phone and replaced the logbook. I knew I couldn't trust the patrol anymore. The system of security had been completely compromised. The clown had an accomplice, or maybe a team. Over the next few days, the small, silent acts continued, all tied to the Neighborhood Watch. Julia's tires, which I had just replaced, were found completely deflated, but not punctured. They were simply let down, with the valve caps removed, and placed neatly on her driver's seat. A flyer for the Neighborhood Watch, detailing emergency contacts, was left taped to our front door. Only one number had been circled in crude red marker: my own cell phone number. And then there was the message on my car. I was leaving for work when I saw it on the driver's side window. Someone had used a tiny, precision-tipped marker to write a message in the fine layer of condensation on the glass. It read, Thank you for your service. It was a line of sincere, mocking gratitude, signed with a small, perfectly drawn, sad face, the tear streaking down its cheek, just like the one I had seen in the mirror in the theme park's employee bathroom years ago. The past had finally caught up. This wasn't a new clown. It was a continuum of the same psychological game, being played by a new, unknown actor. I couldn't maintain the calm thinker facade anymore. The sight of that tiny, drawn face broke my control. I drove straight to Mr. Peterson's house. I was shaking, adrenaline coursing through me. The house was impeccable, a shrine to suburban order. Mr. Peterson opened the door, a slight, neat man in a cardigan, looking completely unremarkable. "Marcus, you seem stressed. Car trouble?" he asked, a practiced, friendly smile on his face. I didn't answer. I pulled out my phone and showed him the picture of the logbook page with my name listed as being on patrol on the 15th. "Who logged my name here, Peterson?" I demanded, my voice tight. I wasn't on shift that night. He looked at the screen, and his face didn't change, only his eyes. The friendly light went out, replaced by a cold, appraising stare. "Ah yes, a scheduling error," he said, taking a step back and resting his hand on the doorknob, preparing to end the conversation. "I sometimes write in the names for future shifts to keep the pages neat. Don't lie to me. I know what's going on," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I pulled the tiny, stamp-sized neighborhood watch card out of my pocket and laid it on the polished wood of his hallway table. The stick-on eyes, the red tape smile, the logbook entry about a figure staring at the houses. "This isn't an error, Peterson. This is the audition." The word hung in the air, heavy with the weight of my past. Peterson looked at the card, then back at me. He let go of the doorknob. The silence was complete, save for the incessant drumming of the rain outside. "You're observant, Marcus," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. His face was still, completely unremarkable, but the sheer focus in his eyes was the same terrifying intensity I had seen through the camera lens years ago. The neighborhood watch is a perfect concept. People pay attention to you when you're doing something ordinary. He walked past me, into his living room. He stopped at a beautiful, glass-fronted cabinet, the kind people use for fine china. But his wasn't filled with porcelain. It was filled with cameras, dozens of them. Hidden pen cameras, tiny pinhole lenses, motion-activated trail cams. And in the center, sitting on a black velvet cushion, was a cheap, plastic-encased clock. It was one of the pirate clocks from the theme park, the minute hand gone, the hour hand fixed on 3. Peterson slowly turned to face me. "I read the papers, Marcus. I followed the story. The clown at the park, the manager, Gary. He was just too messy, too fast. He didn't understand the true art of the slow burn, the psychological architecture of fear." He smiled, and it was a simple, pleasant, neighborly smile. "But I saw the red tape in the back of my mind. I only had to watch you for a few weeks to realize you were the perfect subject. Every security measure you take, the careful locks, the early patrols, the controlled behavior, it's all a reaction to the trauma. It's a beautiful mechanism." He paused, leaning against the cabinet. "But you're right. It's not just me. We all have the same feeling, Marcus. The crushing boredom. The need for a performance. We just needed a subject who knew the choreography." "Who is we?" I demanded, my hand already on my phone, ready to call the police. "We are the men you don't notice. The men in the hardware stores. The managers in the theme parks. The engineers on your street." He gestured to the glass cabinet. "This is the real neighborhood watch. We share the stories, the techniques, the auditions. We keep each other from going messy, like Gary." He reached into the cabinet and pulled out a small, sealed plastic bag. Inside was a single, slightly flattened, faded red balloon, the same kind that had been tied to my bike spokes after the yard sale. "Welcome back to the show, Marcus," Peterson said, his voice calm, matter-of-fact, terrifying. "Your reaction has been logged, and your fear has been duly recorded. I didn't call the police. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they would say. Non-criminal, unsubstantiated claims. I backed out of the house and drove home, my entire body vibrating with a fear that had gone beyond panic. It was a cold, absolute realization. The clown was not a single man. It was an idea. A self-selecting community of ordinary men who had chosen to step out of their banal lives and weaponize the anxiety of others. They were everywhere. I moved Julia and me out of the neighborhood the next day. not telling her why, just saying my job had transferred me suddenly. I still live in fear, but it's not the fear of a monster breaking down a door. It's the persistent, insidious dread that every time I see a completely unremarkable man, a cashier, a bus driver, an accountant, I have to wonder, is he watching me? Does he have a red balloon in his pocket? Is he one of the actors in the permanent, endless performance of my life? The terror is not that you are being watched by a killer. The terror is that you are being watched by a completely ordinary man who has decided that your fear is the only thing that makes his life worth living. And he's got a whole neighborhood watching with him.